Part of your reading this week includes information about a trans-crisis state and how it can be different from post-traumatic stress disorder. It's really important in terms of working with people in crisis to understand the difference and also be able to help that person a little more effectively. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was a trans-crisis state and what exactly is it? So a trans-crisis state can occur during or after a personal crisis. So different people may fall into this or have this feeling anytime during a post-crisis period. It may not happen immediately. Trans-crisis can follow an acute crisis where it appears someone has totally recovered from the crisis, but new stressors put them back to that crisis state. Also, a trans-crisis state may occur when unresolved feelings, often anger, make an everyday event an extraordinary event. So where one person may not have a strong reaction to an event, another person may almost seem to overreact, and it can be based on feelings that we don't really know anything about. Trans-crisis state, the original trauma will reemerge and seem acute again to that person. So let's talk a little bit more about what post-traumatic stress disorder is. Some are really surprised to know that PTSD can occur in adults, adolescents, and even children. What's interesting about children is when they're showing signs of PTSD, it may come out in their play. So it surprises people sometimes when a child looks like he or she is playing, but is really suffering from symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. The definition I have here from the Mayo Clinic talks about post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event. And this event can happen to someone who's experiencing it firsthand or witnessing it. Various symptoms can include flashbacks, nightmares, and severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event. It's important to remember, too, that the post-traumatic stress disorder has specific diagnostic criteria, including the review of symptoms, that fit into specific categories. And I do want to mention these categories. In addition, I will be posting some information from the DSM-5 if you want to read about it in more detail. It's really interesting to read about the different symptoms of PTSD and how they come out in different people. So if we want to look at some of those categories, these categories, one person doesn't have to have symptoms from all of these categories, but definitely from one or more. So the first thing they might talk about is intrusive memories, so that they have trouble concentrating on other things without having that traumatic event right in the forefront of their thoughts. And they can really be having some very distressing memories of the trauma, even when the trauma seems to have been over. Some people will refuse to talk about a traumatic event. They're having symptoms of PTSD, but talking about that event can even be more traumatic for the person. So depending on the event, if they can avoid places or activities that bring that event back to their memory, they will do that. Think of a serviceman who maybe avoids going to 4th of July fireworks shows because the sounds of the fireworks might bring them back to things that they experienced in battle. Very often someone with PTSD will have negative changes in their thinking and their mood. They may have very negative thoughts about themselves because they don't feel like they're handling the crisis well, or that they put themselves in the wrong place to experience that crisis. They may also have negative thoughts about other people and may close people off, or they sometimes even have negative thoughts about the world around them. They can experience things like hopelessness, detachment or disassociation, or even becoming emotionally numb, to where they don't really feel any emotion at all, except maybe those negative thoughts and the intrusive memories. And then changes in their physical and emotional reactions. You'll very often hear PTSD described, or symptoms being described as someone being hypervigilant. They're always on guard. They're always waiting for something around the next corner that's going to come out and jump at them. Again, this often happens with servicemen because they have to be on guard. If you think about a serviceman who served in Afghanistan, and had to constantly be worrying about IEDs, it's easy to understand why they're hypervigilant. They can have difficulty sleeping because of that hypervigilance or because of the intrusive thoughts. And they often exhibit some self-destructive behavior. Remember, too, that we often think of PTSD when we think of people who have served in war. But PTSD is not limited to people in the military. Someone can have symptoms of PTSD after a violent attack, a sexual assault, or physical abuse. So we have to remember that it's not just servicemen and women that suffer from this. There are some similarities between PTSD and transcrisis, and sometimes the characteristics are very similar. While not all people in a transcrisis state show signs of PTSD, there are some similar symptoms. Chronic kinds of thinkings, again, those repetitive thoughts that they have trouble turning off, and feeling like they're still in that crisis, even though the crisis has passed. So if someone, for example, witnesses a very scary automobile accident, just witnessing that can be traumatic. And sometimes they're afraid to look to maybe even drive because they don't want to run into having that crisis again. So that crisis never totally goes away for them. So we need to keep this in mind when we're dealing with people in crisis, because also what might seem like a crisis to them might not seem like a crisis to us. But that doesn't lessen that person's feeling of crisis. So we really need to be sensitive to it. We'll talk more about transcrisis and post-traumatic stress as we continue in the semester.